It's a great question, and there's quite a few ways that we seek to do that. But I guess I'll pick it up here. About 18 months ago, we made a decision to change our mission statement. The mission statement that we had before, I thought when we put it into place in the early 90s, was quite ambitious. Our founder didn't think it was ambitious enough, so he made the decision to unilaterally drop a new mission statement on us, which is, we're in business to save our home planet. And I think the way that we're thinking about that and the framework that we're trying to put into it is a focus on our own footprint, on scaling solutions to moving from conventional agriculture to more regenerative organic options, decentralized community-based energy sources, and then the ongoing protection of wild places. So those are our primary areas of focus.
Okay. And it's also important in Orange strategy, Ramon Fernandez. How are you doing? How are you coping with that? How are you translating your purpose when it comes to corporate responsibility into real-life actions?
Well, you know, we just published in December the new strat plan for Orange, looking at 2025. And we made, I think, a bold step, which is to say there are two main messages in this strategy. The first one is we are looking for growth, and the second one is sustainability. And we started the meeting with investors, with financial analysts, in saying we need to work for digital inclusion, we need to work looking at fighting against climate change, and we took very specific commitments looking at digital inclusion, look at climate change with specific KPIs. And you know, when you work in the telecom industry, to start a meeting with investors, with financial analysts, in saying sustainability is as important as growth.
It's a bold move.
It's quite a bold move.
Yeah, obviously. And what was their reaction, the investors you've been meeting? And after that, we're going to go to Firoz Ladak, who is an investor himself.
Well, I think there is a broad endorsement of this. But when you meet investors, I think there is still a big gap between the talk, which is, you know, a number of commitments, letters, etc., saying that, you know, ESG, CSR is critical. And the questions I have, when I meet investors, I must say in roadshows, I think I can count on my hand the number of questions I had over the past years on these issues. So it is an ongoing process. It is changing, but it takes time, and I think it raises questions about the incentives. Why would investors be incentivized to put their money in companies who do something about these issues? It's, I think, something we should reflect on.
So, Firoz Ladak, as I was saying, what is the point of view of the investor? Because you're an investor, but an investor with a specific agenda when it comes to ESG criteria and corporate responsibility. What is your point of view? How do you see things moving?
So we've operated over the last 5 years a radical change of our investment approach across the 10 foundations which I manage. And actually, I beg to differ with you. First of all,
I like people differ in my panels, you know.
First of all, the ESG market worldwide is about $32 trillion today, of which Europe is still ahead of the game because we were early on, primarily because of regulation, but also because of the European mindset, which is somewhat different on these issues than America. However, America is definitely catching up. We've seen big moves like BlackRock and others starting to move more and more funds into ESG, which of course can be debated and questioned. What we've also seen is that if you look at a continent like Australia, 60% today of assets under management in Australia and New Zealand are ESG. And finally, I would say, if you look at Japan, Japan was nowhere in 2014, and today they've totally climbed for two reasons. One is regulation, and the second thing, which is becoming a more and more pressure on companies, is pension funds. Pension funds are moving more and more into that direction, looking at companies that are not making ESG a nice to have or obligation or something that we have to do, but rather something which is more and more ingrained in the business model of companies like Patagonia.
What is your point of view about this all, Charmian? Because you have a specific point of view. At B-Lab, you're working on certifications focused on ESG criteria. How do you see things moving in the companies and in the financial community?
Well, so merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie. You're welcome, my dear.
So perhaps just maybe to take a step back to speak a little bit about what a B Corp is.
Yeah, of course.
I'm here to talk a little bit about the movement of for-profit businesses that have been certified to reach a very high level in terms of both how they operate, so what their operations involve, but also what their business model is, so what they are in the business of actually doing. So certified B corporations are for-profit businesses that meet this very high standard. An important thing that you have to do to become a B Corp is actually you have to change your articles or your governing documents. And I think I would just pick up on this piece about how you really lock it in. Like, what does it mean to be a purposeful business? This means actually making it explicit that your director's duties are to equally consider shareholders and stakeholders. So I wanted to bring that up because actually the B Corp movement, I think, represents an incredible group of businesses that are really stepping up into this space and really locking in what it means to be a business that has value or a business that is creating profit through having a very strong and delineated purpose. When it comes to some of the trends that I think we've already just been hearing about, I think one of the things that's also important to reference is that everything is changing right now so quickly, right? I mean, anyone who says that today is going to be the same as tomorrow is probably missing the fact that we are in a moment in history where the speed of change is extraordinary. And that's where I think what's important is for us to recognize that that change means that we need to be continually improving. And that's a really core part of what it means to be a B Corp, is to be constantly watching what's happening in the world and how do we continue to lead by stepping forward and taking action where it's needed.
Yeah, we were talking about bold moves. Obviously, it's very important. You were telling us to be a purposeful company, you need to change your governance. You need also to take those stakes and to put it in the core of the strategy, which I used to call it a Copernican move, a Copernican revolution. How did you manage it? Ryan, you were telling us the roadmap that was drawn by your CEO. But now, into action on a day-to-day basis, how did it change?
Well, let me clarify one point. Our founder put in place this new mission statement, and he has never felt an obligation to actually give you a how-to manual. And so I think it was really us, because it's a very flat organization, that us as a European management team that went away over a 6-month period and really challenged ourselves. What's the framework through which we can focus not on symptoms of the climate and ecological crisis, but on the root causes? And so that's what's led to these 4 principles. How do we put it into our business? We use our money. We use our voice, we work with our people, they're out doing environmental internships, they're participating directly in direct actions. We host events internally and externally. We are committed, as we have been since the mid-'80s, to giving 1% of revenue to small grassroots environmental organizations working on behalf of the planet. And when we bring eco-solutions, better ways of bioengineering product, we're committed to open sourcing them to everybody, including our competitors. So that's kind of how we've got it embedded in the business.
That's the roadmap, but could you showcase it in a few instances, a few precise initiatives?
One here in Europe is a campaign that we've been involved in for the last 6 years called Save the Blue Heart of Europe. If you look at a map of all of Europe, there are no wild and free-flowing rivers left in all of Europe, with the exception of the Balkan Peninsula. And the fact that there's some left is the good news. The flip side of that is there are over 3,000 hydropower projects queued up on those rivers. And so we've been working with local activists and organizations to highlight the need to protect those rivers. We've included our employees in that. We built a film, toured it extensively, and then tied it to a petition that we took to the board of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development to pressure them to think differently about the impacts of their investments.
And how do you cope with it in Orange, Ramon Fernandez? How do you go beyond the words, beyond the purpose, in real-life action? Obviously, it's a huge company with a very complicated structure, many strategic fields. could you showcase us as well a few initiatives that are some kind of role models for the company when it comes to managing this change?
Okay, the first step was to take specific commitments.
Yeah.
For instance, net zero carbon in 2040, which is 10 years before the general commitment. Reducing by 30% CO2 emission by 2025. Getting 50%.
It's tomorrow in 2025.
It is tomorrow. Getting 50% of renewable energy in 2025. So all this is commitment, it's communicated, we will have to be accountable. How do we do this? We promote the circular economy, for instance, recycling. In the telecom industry, using recycled second-hand equipment in the network is not really the habit.
It's a Copernican revolution in itself.
We're doing this. Recycling devices. I mean, in France, for instance, you have 100 million phones sitting in your cupboards, you know, sitting somewhere. Last year, we took back 1.1 million. We are recycling these phones. I have one in my pocket. I will go and recycle my phone. But you know, our objective is by 2025 to have 30% of our total phones being put on the market being taken back. Not the same ones, the older ones. 30% is a huge number. So we have to organize the whole supply chain, the whole procurement policy of a company to go in this direction. This is extremely concrete. It is extremely complicated, but we have engaged this. We have live box that we can recycle. We are renting them. We are not selling them like this. We get them back. 90% of our live box are being taken back and recycled and go back to the customers. This is how you're going to generate, you know, benefits.
Obviously, a huge take. Recycling is also, circular economy is also at the core of the your strategy right now, Ryan, at Patagonia?
Yeah, by weight, about 73% of our fibers are recycled content.
That's important. That's not the common case in the textile industry. Charmian, when you hear such statements, are there role models? Are there single company? Do other companies try to go this way as well?
Yeah,
even if they're not as advanced as Patagonia or Orange.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of companies that are recognizing that actually they need to address the impacts of their products in really sophisticated ways, and that it has to be deeply strategic in terms of how we actually think about products at a business model. So I would say that there is a growing community, of which many are in our B Corp sort of family, that are really looking at those challenges. I think what I would want to mention, though, is I think that everyone's going to be trying different experiments and trying out different ways to address these problems. One of the ways we'll all go further, faster, is if we do it together. And that's why, you know, Ryan, you're talking about opening up, you know, some of the innovation you've created so that other people can engage in it. I think this idea of building platforms for collective action, where people can build coalitions and work together to solve these problems, is going to be a really important part of the journey. So yes, it's about what individual companies can do, and different companies will be at different stages of the journey. But ultimately, the big thing is how do we get these organizations to work together? And that's where I think we're going to see really big change happen.
And Firoz Ladak, what is your point of view? Obviously, your neighbors are some kind of front runners when it comes to this revolution. And what about the others?
So what we've done is also look more closely at specific sectors where we find that the whole sustainability agenda is really starting to move inside the business model. One of which is, of course, health. Health is a very interesting area where, by definition, it should create a positive impact. So we've looked quite closely at health funds. Another one is cosmetics, which is really interesting because without naming, on one hand, there's been a lot of efforts made on the treatment of water, for instance, or on packaging. But on the other, we also find that a lot of end products are actually toxic. So there's a whole debate about cosmetics. And finally, a third sector, which is really promising, is infrastructure. A lot of companies, including in France, we have one of, among the best companies, are really looking at rehabilitation of cities, green energy, which are now really deeply ingrained. And basically what I'm trying to say is that ESG becomes a business opportunity. It's not only a trade-off.
Okay. Even purposeful companies need to, are depending on their ecosystem. And not everyone has the same agenda when it comes to this revolution. Not every investor has the same agenda. Not everyone in the textile industry or in the tech industry has the same agenda. So you're depending on it. How do you cope with it? With those roadblocks, with those slower ones? Ryan?
You know, I think for us, we do what we do because we believe it's the right way to run a business, and we believe it's a responsible way to run a business. And to that end, you know, we're often introduced or held up as this paragon for sustainability in business. The reality is we've been at this for 47 years. We have constantly chipped away at every problem that we can find within our business and our supply chain and tried to solve the big ones. And all they do is invite us to another bigger problem as we know more. And the point I want to make is we're not a sustainable company after 47 years of trying. If anything, we're a responsible one. But to the question of how do we deal with others who either don't care or profess to care because it's a trend at the moment, we just continue to show up and do what we do.
It reminds me of a quote from Richard Branson. If you think it's right, screw it, let's do it. That's, in fact, that could be your motto as well, maybe. Okay. Ramon Fernandez, how do you cope with the various agenda when it comes to the tech industry, which is, for instance, a highly energy-consuming ecosystem?
Yeah, well, first, I think Firoz said something very important, which is that there is no contradiction between what we are talking about now and, let's say, economics. When you look at recycling, it's both good in terms of impact, but it's also good in terms of economics. And this is where I think we will be able to trigger a real move. There is no contradiction, on the contrary. So we work, obviously, with our ecosystem. We are part, for instance, of something which is called the JAC, the Joint Audit Committee. It is a platform of 17 telco companies who work with all the subcontractors and make sure that all the social and environment commitments we have as a company are also fulfilled by our subcontractors. So I think by capillarité, we need this, I'm not sure it's English, but never mind, you know what I mean. We will be able to spread this awareness and commitments. We have to work all together.
Charmian, Firoz Ladak, what do you think of it? Those straightforward companies are in fact leading the pack, and globally the move is on a positive way. Charmian, what do you think of it?
Yeah, well, I think if you're asking the trajectory where things are going, I think more and more businesses and importantly people within businesses are waking up and actually seeing that this is really a great way to do business. It makes your employees happy. People want to work with your business, and that then gives you the conditions to build a long-term business that's going to have value for many years to come. I think also we're seeing customers within the supply chain partners that are really interested in what the innovation can be that can help move this forward. But you know, to the point that's already come up, it requires leadership. And leadership means, you know, holding true to the things that you value and that you hold as being the core constructs of what you want to do as a business. So again, I think the waves of change are certainly upon us. And I think to be a part of those waves, it really is important to have a clear purpose and recognize that this is where it's going.
Firoz Ladak, do you agree or are you going to differ?
No, of course not. Actually, I don't differ with anybody. I just like to be a bit polemic at times.
Yes.
No, to add to what you're saying, other drivers for me are consumers. So the whole B2C market, and we certainly look at shift in specific areas like consumer goods. You know, big companies like Unilever that more and more have now to start include all this in their business driver, which is the consumer. That's one. And as I said, the investor. It's amazing to see the shift that has occurred over the last 5 years. Not only from institutional investors, but also from private investors who are really driving now the discussion. I've been speaking with a lot of banks in the US or in Europe, and it's always the same thing. How can you make me proud of my investment in terms of revenue? Because in the end, I want to make money, but making sure that somewhat I'm contributing to business for good. So there's a real shift also in the investor mindset. So we believe and we hope that it's just not a trend. It's actually a bulldozer.
Being interdependent has also a positive side. It opens the way for partnerships that helps, that accelerate innovation. Have you been developing partnerships with other blue chip companies or with startups, scale-ups that help you putting your purpose into action? I see you agree, Ryan. Obviously, it's part of the strategy.
Yeah, it is part of the strategy. You know, sometimes I don't think we're great partners because we're committed to what we're committed to, and if we don't like to sit in rooms and debate things very long. But I think that being part of the B Corp community has made us stronger, and hopefully we've brought in something to that as well. We helped co-found the Sustainable Apparel Coalition many years ago, and we've got an internal venture capital fund that we also use to make investments in small startups like many of the ones here today.
Ramon Fernandez, I think it's an important part of our strategy. You're working very much with many startups and other companies. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, there are maybe two aspects to this. First, we have our own corporate venture fund, Orange Digital Ventures, which is going to be revamped and augmented in terms of resources. And within this, there will be an impact fund, which I think will be the first corporate venture fund with an impact fund. Second, and we have here 20 startups that we are working on climate issues, environment, agriculture, energy, etc. But more generally, in Orange, we are participating to an ecosystem, working with startup companies. We have Fab Labs. We have a number of countries where we have a very strong relationship, where we need to work together. You know, the big companies, we're a 40 billion euro revenue company. We have to be part of a game where we nurture this kind of ecosystem. So as a company, we do invest in startups, and then we accompany startup companies, including here. If you have a chance, you will be able to meet with some of them great companies.
Charmian, isn't it one of the most critical points, in fact? You need to work to innovate, to being involving. You need to be doing open innovation. That's the only way to go. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree that that's an important strategy. I mean, I'd say that within our B Corp community, we're seeing a lot of B Corps coming together and sharing approaches. A couple of months ago, actually in December, we had over 500 B Corps at the COP meeting that collectively committed to reaching net zero by 2030. And that's a big commitment to make. And just yesterday in London, we had, I think, over 60 people from different B Corps in the UK coming together and talking about, well, how are we going to figure out how we're going to meet that target? So there is absolutely a way of sharing information, sharing experiments, sharing the innovation that's happening in order to meet some of these big objectives. But I would also say something that I think is really interesting that I personally am keeping an eye on quite closely is where we're seeing like unusual collaborations starting to happen. So for example, companies that otherwise would be competing in the market, finding that they actually share a problem and therefore developing ways to collaborate with competitors and what's being called pre-competitive collaboration. I mean, that's pretty cool, and actually that allows a lot of really interesting sharing to happen.
Obviously, Firoz Ladak, I think it's something that is more and more important from the investor point of view. Now, when you try to evaluate a company, it's not only its organization in itself, but also its network, the way it interacts with other companies.
So now let me take off my investor hat and take my,
if you want.
my philanthropic hat. We're in the business of actually running ecosystems of entrepreneurs in Paris, in Madrid, in Abidjan, in London, where we basically really believe in this whole idea of design thinking. So we like bringing startups together that are coming from totally different sectors of the economy, and really encourage that sort of peer-to-peer exchange. We also bring in the bankers. So I'm sitting on the family part of Rothschild, but then, as you know, we also have huge wealth management. So the bankers, and I see some of them here, bring in, and we tell them, stop your high-level banking activities, come with us and bring your expertise, but also those entrepreneurs are going to bring you a lot. And then this is also a way to change company culture. So I would hope that each coach bankers that go back to wealth management can also transform the company culture of these banks or any other institution. So it becomes, in the end, a very virtuous movement.
You were talking about changing the company culture, and even if we're reaching nearing the end of this panel, I want to take time to talk about it, because what we're talking about means never-ending transformation, always being aware, always being ready to do something different if it's better. For the purpose of the company, which change a lot of things when it comes to leading people in the company's network to work differently altogether, to develop new solutions. What are your guiding lines when it comes to what I call advanced management? Ryan, in Patagonia.
You know, I think for us, probably there's two qualities that I think have really guided us. One is there's no finish line in this, so it's constantly waking up every single day and saying, okay, what's next? Don't spend a lot of time patting yourself on the back, just move on to what the next thing is. And I think the other thing that has been kind of embedded in our strategy from early on is being very comprehensive. Include your employees. Think about what the whole suite of assets and resources you have are, and often people think about money, and that's an important one. The creativity and commitment of your employees, your voice, the leadership you can provide, creative solutions. We've launched a digital tool that connects grantees, organizations, and our community. There's just a host of creative ways, I think, when you think broadly about what you have at your disposal.
Charmian, Firoz Ladak, I saw you agreeing with Ryan. Tell us a little bit more about it. Is that the way to go?
Yeah.
One of the ways to go?
I think it's a really important thing. And when you were speaking, I was remembering a term that I heard, which was that culture is what people do when nobody's looking, right? So it's like how you actually make it deeply embedded and a driver of your strategy. I also am reflecting a little bit on this sort of both and a little bit, profit and purpose, and then I think there's lots of both ands we can enter into. One of them is, I think, both having a very, very clear set of values, as you said, Ryan, like unwavering, like this is what you're about, and having a certain level of agility to figure out how you manifest those values and how you manifest that culture. So I think being able to be clear on your culture and being able to hold core values and iterate and be willing to improve is a core part of this.
Ramon Fernandez, on those topics, I know those are important ones for you.
Yeah, you know, Orange just has a purpose. It adopted its purpose in December. But what I would like to talk about in 30 seconds is the purpose of the financial department of Orange that we adopted in the financial department 2 years ago. We have a purpose, which is fostering sustainable growth. But more importantly, I think, coming to your values question, we have 4 values: team spirit, trust, agility, and boldness. And trust me, when all the finance team of Orange says, okay, our values have to capture boldness, I think it says something about the willingness to participate to what we are talking about today.